Hey everybody, welcome back to Omens. This is episode 41, The Hanged Man. I'm your host, Ryan, AM Air Pronouns, and yeah, should be an interesting one. Excuse me. Sorry, just got done eating lunch, so wow, that was also my breakfast. But yeah. Alright, so I wasn't counting when I did this, so I am one card short than my usual stuff, so um, I'm gonna skip a card for the numerology, because why the heck not? So we're gonna skip a card for the numerology, so you'll just have to pretend and imagine there's a card here when there isn't. But anyway, all right. So speaking of the numbers, the Hanged Man's card's number is 12. So now in Pythagorean numerology, we only go 0 through 9. Right? Yeah, so for the most part, anything above that, sometimes there are master numbers. 11 and 22 are definitely master numbers. Some people say 33. Anything beyond that gets muddy. Some people say any double number is a master number. Some people will say no, it's only up to this amount or that amount. It's a mess. But luckily, tarot, we only go up to 21, so we will not have to deal with any of that. Um, However, in uh, in Pythagorean numerology, for the most part, anything that's above a 9 is added up. All its disparate all its numbers are added up, and then it's broken down until it reaches a single digit, basically. Um, Anywhere between 1 and 9, because you can't really add up to equal 0. Unless you've got negative numbers, which we really don't here. So, um, yeah, that doesn't work in Pythagorean numerology either, I think. Heck if I know. Now I'm going to be putting that somewhere in my brain to think about it another time. Alright, so the number 12, and technically we should break that down get to the meaning, we'd break it down into its part, add it up together. So I've mostly, if you've been paying attention, if you've been here for the last few months, you'll notice that when I do it, I take the separate numbers, and then also the number they equal. So first off, we've got the number 1, the number 2, and then 1 plus 2 equals 3, so 1, 2, and 3. But the other thing I've also been doing is trying to find what people have as the meaning for the number as a whole, which is not in Pythagorean numerology. I actually have to go more towards angelic numerology for anything above 9. Um, so we'll also do that. And from what I'm finding, this is only a second one, so we'll see if it continues or not. But for the most part, it looks like the angelic numbers are usually kind of a culmination of the numbers separately anyway, so... But anyway, that's beside the point. So, the number 12, the number 1 is, and we'll cover the 1 a bunch for right here. Because yeah, we've got above a 10 at some point or another. So 1, ego, self, first physical number associated with verbal communication. It's the being coming into existence. It's becoming a being. All right, that one's pretty self-explanatory. If we want more in depth in it, I've covered it before, and I'll probably cover it again eventually, especially as the next month when we get to the Ace of Swords. But either way, 1, ego, self, being, divinity, microcosm within macrocosm, yada yada yada. Has to do with the self, basically. The number 2 is our first spiritual number, or our first feeling number, our first emotional number. In numerology, it all gets the spirit, intuition, soul, and emotion all gets put together into the soul plane. Excuse me. Yeah, just finished eating. Did I mention that yet? All right, so basically, the soul plane gets kind of soul, spirit, heart, intuition, all that put together. And then there's the physical, which is also a little bit intuitive, and but not really. And there's also the mental plane, and then there's the mental plane or the mind plane, which all has to do with mind. And yeah, so the soul gets a lot of the soul plane gets a lot of stuff shoved into it. So, but two is when we first experience the soul, the actual emotions. It's when we realize that we are not alone. When we realize that we are, that I is a thing. That's when we finally find our mirror, basically. When we're like, wait, I am not just a whole, I can actually see myself. Well, we haven't gotten to the point of realization yet. That comes with the number three. That is the third one. Number three is when there's a realization that this is my reflection, this is not me. Number three is the realization. But we're at two where we've like created a reflection where like we can see ourselves and recognize ourselves as a being. So that's the duality, and that's when our intuition comes in, our emotion, when we realize the need for a pair, and it's where we get our sensitivity from. Number three is, like I said, first mind number. When we start, it's a number associated with the intellect, with it first coming into being with Gemini, the questioner, the question maker. For associated with conscious mind, with rationality, and a connection of the mind, soul, and body. It's basically the number one is in existence, two is when it sees itself, and three is when it recognizes that as a separate person from itself, as a second, as that reflection not being itself type deal. That triangle of the mind, soul, and body is represented in number three, and also here in the number 12, because we've got 1 plus 2 equals 3, so 1, 2, and 3. That was a 4 I just showed. But anyway, you get my point. So it's here in the Hanged Man, the numerology. The 12 is all about the 1, 2, and 3. Mind, soul, and body, all coming together. The equal beginning parts of each. These are just the cardinals of this, of the mind, soul, and body. So we've got, basically, if you wanted to kind of throw it to astrology, we've got the number one would be Capricorn, the cardinal earth sign. Number two would be a combination of Aries and Cancer, cardinal fire and water. And number three would be a Libra, the cardinal air sign. So, yeah, like something like that. So we take these four and we've pushed them into three. That is what we come up with in the numerology, is the 1, 2, and 3. It's the primaries of these signs. And Capricorn and Libra only sort of work. I mean, they're cardinal signs, but they're much farther along in the zodiacal wheel. So it's more like one is one is the body, the feeling. One would be more associated with Aries. Two with Taurus, with just Taurus for the most part, and then three with Gemini. So that's slightly more accurate than the cardinals. All right, so we've got all that with our 1, 2, and 3, and then if we take 12 as a whole number using angelic numerology, 12, they call it a message number. It's a message to focus on your divine purpose, on your soul mission, to really know who you are and follow the calling of your soul, as opposed to what's here in the physical world, or what you think you should be focused on. It's like, no, it's time to sit there and listen to your soul, listen to your heart's purpose, what you really, really, really know that you want to do and go to. It's tuning into your inner wisdom and your inner strength, of getting connected with that and being able to go, I'm a whole person unto myself, and I need to do what it is I came here to do, what my purpose is. What is my purpose? Getting in touch with that, getting down to it. So that's kind of 12. Now, I did find kind of a little extra that I thought was interesting. Thought I might as well put it in here because why the hell not? I'm all about defining magpie. I'm a knowledge magpie, as a friend of mine has called me. And so usually when I Google like meaning of such a number, it will often come up with a like 3 pages or more worth of angel numbers. However, when I Googled 12, the first result that comes up, the one that they give you a little snippet of, was actually from a sort of kind of biblical site, I suppose. It wasn't quite biblical because most, like, say, Christianity doesn't really delve into this occult shit, as they may or may not call it. I don't know what they actually call it. Okay, I do know it's probably the devil's work. I mean, seriously, I came from a non-denominational Baptist thing. Yeah, I know what they call this shit. But anyway, so a little bit of a biblical assignation or correlation with the number 12 is in this biblical one. Now, it's granted, it's definitely probably more New Age than, like, say, Christian or New Age Christian or something. I didn't quite go digging into the website as it was because I was running behind on doing this. I did it, yeah, not early enough as I should have. But anyway, so in the Bible, as they say, the number 12 has to do with perfection and authority, especially in regards to government. And now, when they say in relation to government, they even say they most specifically mean, like, say, the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's sons, he had 12 sons, and all of them became a tribe or a nation. Sometimes it's 12 tribes, sometimes it's 12 nations of Israel, of the great nation Israel, basically. So that's where the government part comes from, because it's like there are 12 ruling bodies, or 12 such and such. They're also, again, with that authority. The 12 are in the authority. And also with that authority and perfection comes the 12 disciples of Jesus. And even after he was betrayed by Judas Iscariot, the other apostles basically denoted Matthias. I'm not sure which. I know it was M-A-T-T. I think it might have been Matthias, not Matthias. But basically, Matthias, they made him into one of the original 12 disciples to try to keep the number even, because it had to be 12, not 11. It had to be 12, and Judas was a fallen disciple, basically. I mean, according to their mythology, he did it for a specific purpose, because, not much in the way of free will in Christianity. So, but yeah, so there is that 12 being a number of perfection, shown through that, and that there had to be 12 disciples type deal. Now, there is another 12 that they brought up that I'm like, meh, as to how relevant it is or not to the number. Excuse me, I got a freaking burp. I had a root beer. That's what happened. I'm full of carbon dioxide. So excuse me. The other number 12 that they brought up as associated with the Bible is, who knows how. I mean, now granted, given the early church and their knowledge of trying to make everything about their religion as opposed to any others, this is probably accurate enough. There are 12 books in the Bible that are known as the minor prophets. Now, they're called this not because they're lesser prophets. They're just lesser known because there are more of them than the 4 major prophets. And their books, as opposed to being like, say, Isaiah, which is like that fucking thick. Okay, that's a bit hyperbole, but you get my drift. They're only like maybe a couple of pages long, 2 to 3 pages at most. I think there's even one that might only be 1 page, like 2 biblical chapters basically. There are 12. So there are 12 minor prophets in the Bible, um, plus 4 major, which equals 16 prophets all in all, which is its own interesting numerological tangent, as is too. But yeah, so I don't know how relevant that is or isn't, but at the same time, with the early church and how we know it, with they're trying to make themselves way more reputable than any other religion, they probably did that purposefully. So, and I don't know how many other prophet books there may or may not be. I'd have to do a lot more digging into Judaism and the Torah and historical and uh, yeah, I'm not that interested in it because the Abrahamic religions are fascinating, but there are plenty of scholars of them. I only bother learning what is relevant or interesting to me for the most part. I wish there was more on pagan history and stuff, accurate pagan history and stuff, and that I would actually read it when I get the books. Executive function disorder. It's a lovely thing, isn't it? Alright. Anyway, moving on. Now that I spent 15 minutes on numerology, which is doing better than I was last recording because I started to record this before I realized that no, I hadn't actually eaten breakfast, so the hunger wasn't just from not eating lunch. And I got like 3/4 of the way through this in 15 minutes, and then I was like, yeah, I can't actually think right now. So, we're redoing this. Alright, so that is the numerology. So the next part is the alchemy, or from the Path of Alchemy book that I am sort of kind of working my way through. I'm behind. I'm behind on a lot of things. Alright, and this one I actually do have a tarot card for. Alright, we'll have tarot cards from here on out. So this is from my Hush Tarot, and it shows... Now, the classical depiction of the Hanged Man is a person hanging upside down from a tree or a cross or whatever by one foot with another foot with the other foot behind them, their hands behind their backs, yada yada yada. This one, I love this depiction of it because it has so much freaking meaning. So in the Hush Tarot, we have a hooded and robed figure in a light blue robe with some decoration on it. The braid is obvious enough to see, but if you can see right there, there's also some beadwork on it. And as opposed to hanging upside down, this person is standing upright in a field of grass, or well, it's probably a field of grass. There's only a tuft of grass where they're standing. They're faceless. That's another thing. They're not quite faceless. They have a white face mask, a blank mask over them. So you can't actually see their face beyond their eyes. You can only see their eyes, and they're sitting there trying to untangle themselves from some string that's got them all wrapped up around their feet, and they're trying to untangle themselves here in the grass. So, excuse me. Like, I swear I'm not sick as far as I know. Alright, what do you care? It's the video. Alright, so in my alchemy book, usually, as you'll know, usually I write down the whole little paragraph they have as a full quote. I did write most of it down, but the first couple of sentences, I kind of just shortened it down. So in the alchemy book, the Hanged Man is associated with the sign of sulfur, or the self, real. Oh, no, that's not what I wrote. The sign of sulfur or the self. So sulfur has to do with the soul again. So we have a bit more of that soul mission, soul purpose coming through again, the divine purpose. The soul is slightly more important here than the physical or the mental, basically. So sign of sulfur, realizing self-realizing energies brought to fruition. Oh, okay, I see how I wrote that. Wow. I'm still a little out of it. Okay, so the sign of sulfur, or self-realizing energies brought to fruition. So the hangman is when, yeah, self-realizing energies brought to fruition. So the rest of the quote is, in this, however, the world as it was known is turned upside down. The bonds of material life must be loosened and in some instances lost, so that the energies may flow from the feet to the head and the sublime work realized. So this is talking about how usually the hangman is depicted as hanging upside down, so the energies may go from the feet to the head, so that which is in itself a very interesting symbology, because our feet are the ones that are on the ground doing the working, while our head's up in the clouds meandering around. So the solid, sturdy work, the actual physical doing, is flipped up. When we flip upside down, that physical doing is at the top, and all that work comes flowing down through the body into the mind, bringing all that hard, overlooked work into focus, um, into fruition. It's like all this work you've been doing, here it is presented in your face. It's like you have to stop and actually let the energies permeate and flow up or down, or basically to your head. So that's what I like about this card particularly, is because sometimes that stopping isn't voluntary. Usually in the depiction of the hangman, that stopping and letting yourself hang like that taking that moment to stop and let the energies permeate into realization or bring them into fruition is a voluntary stop in most depictions. It's like, okay, we're going to stop here, we're going to take stock. But here in this card, it's more accurate to the majority of all of ours real life, where we're like, we just keep going and going until something stops us and goes, would you wait? You need to take stock. You need to stop. You need to let this energy work its way through, and then you can keep moving. And oftentimes, if we're just going and going and going, eventually the world will stop us, like we have had in this card, where this figure got tangled up in these rushes. They're no longer able to move forward until they stop and look around. And actually, they're sitting here kind of looking around. Their face is going one way, but I don't know if you can see it, but their eyes are actually glancing down towards their feet, and they're starting to like, okay, I gotta go up, but I need to stop and look at this and actually turn my attention to this percolation and take a minute to actually realize what's going on around me, like actually stopping and waiting and looking. So that's the alchemy. And next up is our astrology. And this is where things are going to start getting interesting. So, astrology, we have my celestial deck here, and we've got Neptune riding his chariot, pulled by his white seahorses. I forget their actual name. I know the horses with the tails have a specific name, but it didn't, even right here, it's hard to tell. I mean, we know what they're supposed to look like. I forget their name. But there's also the possibility that it could just be just plain old horses, because Poseidon is in Greek mythology, the creator of horses. And then, of course, back here in the mist, we've got a homage to the original hanged man back here, just a dude hanging upside down. But our forefront here, our main focus is Neptune riding his chariot. And the planet Neptune is known as the planet of spiritual and psychic enlightenment. Excuse me, Jabez. The planet is, it's composed mostly of mists and gases, which brings it kind of a symbolic slash literal representation of escape from the ordinary bounds of physics. It's like, usually when we think of how planets are made and how everything's compressed, it's rock, it's dirt, it's the earth type stuff, all compressed together. In Neptune's case, there isn't that it is mostly just ethereal matter. It's vapors, it's gases, it's just it's stuff we don't it's not stuff we think of it usually as solid. It's a ton of compressed gas, basically. So that ethereal water permeating vapor is kind of makes us think that's what we usually picture fantasy psychic realms when you know how in the cartoons when they're doing like a imagination thing, like a character's like, oh, and they start doing kind of it's either a flashback or imagination, the screen gets really really wavy, like it'll wave itself back until it and change from the one scene to the fantasy scene or whatever. That's kind of what we think of. It's like we're going through waves of water into the psychic imagination realm, the fantasy realm. We're imagining new things. So Neptune is associated with obviously fantasy, imagination, and visionary art. Um, so art we can see, not so much like music we can hear, even though that is also in its own way art, but more visual art is more of Neptune's focus. What we see, the psychic, the clairvoyance. Um, Neptune is also Neptune and those ruled by the planet Neptune. So basically, anyone who has their rising sign is in Pisces is a good way to see if you're ruled by Neptune, because whatever your rising sign is, the planet of that sign is your ruling planet. So, for instance, my rising sign is Sagittarius, so my ruling planet is Jupiter, which was it retrograde? No, I don't think it was. Side tangent, sorry. So if your rising sign is in Pisces, you're ruled by the planet Neptune. Those ruled by planet Neptune, and Neptune itself is known for being idealistic, sensitive, and exceptionally psychic. Um, they're very bad at establishing boundaries because Neptune is water flows and water and gases and vapor and mist. They flow and they permeate. It's if you've ever seen that, if you've ever heard that riddle, it's a house full, a hole full, yet you cannot gather a bowl full. The answer is, if you didn't know this, sorry, spoilers. The answer is either smoke or mist, depending on. And it's the same. It just permeates. A house full, a hole full. Like it just goes everywhere. It permeates, but you can't actually contain it in like a bowl, for example. And so because of that, it doesn't have good boundaries. Those with Neptune as their ruling planet and Neptune itself don't have good boundaries. They just go everywhere. They permeate everything, which means they can often get overwhelmed because Neptune is water itself is such a receptive sponge. It absorbs everything. Um, there is very little such thing as pure water. Because it absorbs so much. In fact, if you think back to Frozen 2, if you ever saw that movie, Elsa discovers that she can freeze water vapor in the air and in a certain place, and it will capture a memory, like an ice sculpture of what happened there ages ago, which is in itself a little weird because it's like technically that water from that time should have already moved on to somewhere else, but that's a whole nother deal. Um, maybe not, but so it's more like capturing the image in that place that through water type deal. And the reason they did that is because not too long before, scientists had actually discovered that water does hold memory. Like it can remember where it's been, what shape it has taken before. I don't remember, I don't know all the science they did with it, but I do know that we now know that water holds memory. So, bringing that back to Neptune, water is receptive, it is extremely psychic, it's able to hold memory, impressions, everything. So, those ruled by Neptune are are basically sponges for everything, which is where it can get into some problematic stuff, or some shadow sides of that is they've got such bad boundaries and they absorb so much that they end up using escapist tendencies. A lot of Piscean people have very strong escapist tendencies. They're like, because it gets to be too much, it overwhelms them, so they're like, I gotta get out of this. So some of the healthier escapist tendencies, well, depending, there's such a thing as too much for everything. Some of their escapist tendencies, escaping through meditation, prayer, sleep, dreams, drugs, alcohol, what have you, whatever gets them out of their own head and away from all the psychic noise they're constantly got meshing through them. That's why they need boundaries, they need filters. And that brings us to the next section of this, which is complete opposite of Neptune. The Kabbalah, and here I have my Archantero, which is again kind of a traditional depiction of a figure hanging from a post. Kind of from, this one is more from a gallows thing. They're hanging upside down from gallows thing. This side post kind of gives a sheen of like metal. There are crows on the top crossbar, but the figure hanging from the crossbar is not your usual person. It's a mummified corpse. My light is being irritating. It's gonna get a little bright there. There we go. It's a mummified corpse. Um, which has its own thing. It's almost like being still for too long, stagnating, ending up. It actually kind of it gets a little closer to the next card being death. It's like you've been still for so long, you've actually just died. Which isn't good in itself, but that's not the important part right here, right now. What I'm interested in at the moment is we've gone from Neptune, which is the planet of psychic, just sponges, just filtering in everything, no limits, no boundaries whatsoever, to the other association with the hangman through Kabbalah, which is path 23, between Geburah and Had. Geburah is the Sephiroth of severity, of limitations. It's associated with Mars. It's known as the Great Limiter, as one of its names, one of its titles. It represents anguish from anguish from being cut off from doing something, being cut off, being told no more of this. Karma, when we create our reckonings, when we're like, okay, because of this, this is the next pattern that will happen. Because of this, this is what happens next. Okay, we've managed to erase this, so we don't have to deal with that. It's the finishing, the calculations, the deciding the ends of it. I like to think of it as associated more with Saturn's as opposed to Mars, even though Gevura is traditionally associated with Mars as its harsh ruler, as the harshness that cuts and ends. Saturn is more of the boundary maker for me. It's also balance here in Gebra. It's like, okay, we've had too much, now it's the time to stop. And it's like, this is where we create the balance. Had is the logic, the mind, our rationality, our clarity, how we analyze things, where we act and are more analytical, or in our intellect, and it's associated with Mercury as well. So both of these two are on the pillar of severity in the Kabbalistic tree of life. They're between the realms of creation and formation, Baraya and Yetzirah. So we've gone from the astrological Neptune of way too much, more akin to the Sephiroth of mercy, which is overflowing abundance and sweetness. So we've got all that Neptune permeation, and now the other side of this is Gevura and Had's severity, the limits. Okay, great, you've been all in your psychic emotions, because Neptune is about emotions, the psychic, overflowing abundance, and then past 23 is like It's time to go between the limiter and the mind. It's like, okay, great, all of this is wonderful. Now let's bring it down to earth and actually make something of it. Let's examine this. Let's create limits, boundaries, a filter to stop all this excess coming in. So this hanged man is very, very much limited. It's like, okay, stop. We need to make checklists. We need to understand what all this actually is, what all we're doing. Yeah, it's the hangman has two different sides from two different things almost. It's like from the astrology, it's open everything, sitting and stewing in all the psychic bliss, and then on the other from the Kabbalah comes in the limits. It's like we're going between our mind and our limits. It's like all this psychic stuff from Neptune, now we've actually got to sit with it and understand it and limit it and create boundaries and really think on it. So we've got both of those coming through in the Hanged Man. Now, let's continue on a little bit of the Kabbalah. The Kabbalistic angel for the Hanged Man is Nulachael, who is a throne, the third hierarchy of angel from the top, one of the first, the lowest of the first tier, which is the highest tier, which is closest to God or Creator or whatever. Thrones are all about protection, watching the throne of God and whatnot. And Nulachael serves to their realm of importance. They serve to protect against troublemakers, defend from spells, and destroy the power of evil spirits. So very much a guardian protector. So which is interesting for the Hanged Man. It's very much a guardian and protector. It's not something you really associate with the Hanged Man, but this is not the first odd one that's a little bit different than the others. The next one is too. If you've been here long enough, you know what the next card is. Alright, so Nulachael, those born under Nulachael, love poetry and literature and have a passion for study. So that's a little bit more like the Hanged Man. It's like we're both poetry and literature are kind of under the realm of Neptune. Poetry especially, it's love, imaginations, flowing water, it's emotion. And then literature is a little bit, depends on the type of literature. It can be either more emotional or more intellectual. A study, that's definitely intellectual. So we've got that from one side to the other side extremism between these two. Right and the left brain coming into synchronicity. It's very much a combining of the left and the right, actually. Nulachael is the soul guardian for those born from 6:40 to 7 a.m., the physical guardian for those born June 28th to July 2nd, and the moral guardian for those born January 22nd, April 9th, June 20th, August 31st, and November 11th. Alright, so Nulachael, oh, I forgot, Nulachael's name means the only God, by the way. That's it's Throne 21, and I realized I haven't been doing the Psalms for these guys, but you could always just buy the deck or a book on the Kabbalistic angels, or the 72 Kabbalistic angels. Alright, anyway, moving on. So the next bit is also a little weird for the Hanged Man for what we've been going through. So our being from the Fantasy World Tarot, or the Spirit of Halloween Tarot, is the imp. So the Hanged Man is represented by an imp. And I've been recently gotten into Hell of a Hotel, or Has Been Hotel, and Hell of a Boss, and Hell of a Boss has imps that are epic. So imps are from European mythological beings that are similar to both a fairy or a demon. And here we've got an imp hanging from a crossbeam by his tail, kind of given a mischievous grin hanging over a boiling cauldron, which is surrounded by smoke and hellfire. This is definitely supposed to be down in hell type deal. Imps are more troublesome and mischievous than dangerous. They're smaller than most demons, and they're kind of lesser demons type deal. They're more about. They've also been. There's also a thing about imps being witches' familiars. I mean, most everything was at one point or another at this rate. But so I'll read a little bit from Wikipedia. So Uh, an imp is a European mythological being similar to a fairy or demon, frequently described in folklore and superstition. The word may perhaps derive from the term yimpe, used to denote a young grafted tree. Um, Imps are often described as troublesome and mischievous, more than seriously threatening or dangerous, and as lesser beings rather than more important supernatural beings. The attendants of the devils are sometimes described as imps. They are usually described as lively and having small stature, and there's honestly not a whole lot on them. They originate from Germanic folklore. The imp was a small, lesser demon. Unlike the Christian faith and stories, demons in Germanic legends were not necessarily always evil. Imps were often mischievous rather than evil or harmful, and in some regions they were attendants of the gods. Um, So yeah, they're not very attractive. Behavior is described as being wild and uncontrollable, much the same as fairies. And in some cultures, they are considered the same beings, both sharing the same sense of free spirit and enjoyment of all things fun. It was later in history that people began to associate fairies as being good and imps as being malicious and evil. However, both creatures were fond of pranks and misleading people. Most of the time, these pranks were harmless and fun, but some could be upsetting and harmful, such as switching babies or leading travelers astray in places which they were not familiar. Um, so yeah, they're mischief makers for the most part. They're a little bit more associated with hell or the evil or demons than say other fairies are. They're probably a subcategory of fairy, maybe even, or cousins too. I don't know. I'm not much for demonology or fairy lore. Um, so, as for its association with the Hanged Man, that is quite interesting. Now, I'd almost say because it does, given the creator of this deck, from what I can tell from where she's from, all that, and also given its association, given the Hangman's association with Neptune and Neptune's tendency to escapism, especially through unhealthy habits, and Imp's association with demons, I'd say this is probably a little bit more representative of if you're not careful, things could go very, very wrong for you type deal. It's like you need this again that has that feeling of because the hangman is often about stopping to take stock and seeing what's actually going on, being able to actually look as to what's going on around you. It's like, okay, you need to stop or something's going to go very, very wrong here. It's like you need to stop and take a look at what's going on around you. Like, what have you been doing? Where is this leading you? What are you doing now? It's like if you're not careful, this cauldron could blow up in your face. It's like you need to have your boundary. Neptune needs to set boundaries, and Gevra and Hod need to open up a little bit. It's again, it's a bit of both. It's like, have you been too open? Have you been too limited? Where do you need to change some stuff so shit doesn't blow up in your face? And that's where I'd read that imp. It's like this could get. It might not be all that bad if you don't take stop. You might end up like back in our hush card, tangled up in a string because you weren't watching where you were going, and now you're having to stop. Or you could get burnt, or you could get half your face burnt off. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I have with the imp. All right, so the last part of this is the traditional meanings of the Hanged Man card. And I have my vice versa tarot for that because why the heck not? Um, oh, that's sulfur, isn't it? Yeah. So here in the vice versa tarot card, this side we've got the hangman hanging by a rope from a crossbeam of two trees that have just basically all giant logs that have just had their limbs chopped off and stood upright, and he's just kind of hanging there peacefully. He's got the symbol of sulfur on his jacket. On that side, we see behind him where there's from behind him, and we see that there's a snake, a symbol of transformation, and actually it's associated with some other cards throughout this deck. We've seen that same snake. Um, and he's kind of like whispering in the guy's ear. And snakes are known for being secret keepers. They know the mysteries of the earth. So here we see a holder of the mysteries speaking to this hanged man who, and in front of the hanged man we see the two acolytes who are actually from earlier in this deck, from the Hierophant. And they were students of the Hierophant, and now they've come to learn from them. They've come to see what the hanged man is seeing. They're not really looking at him. They're looking up at the vast expanse of stars that he's looking at. They're they're coming to learn to see from his point of view, to see what exactly he sees, to try to understand. And he's getting the secrets of the earth from this serpent here. So, in um, well, traditional readings, the hangman as a representative is actually often associated with martyrdom. It's associated with saints and with saints who would like insist on being hung upside down on a cross because they didn't feel worthy to die the same way of as their Lord Jesus Christ did. There's actually quite a few. I'm gonna find this from here. So this is from Kitchen Table Tarot by Melissa Sinova. She's the one I steal all this traditional meaning stuff from. So I wanted to read this part because it was actually interesting. Because often I'll associate the hangman more with Odin than with Christ or St. Peter or anything. But she's actually got quite a few in here. There's more than one religion. So, quote, there is more than one religion that speaks of a man hanged from a tree. Mithras in Roman mythology, Odin from Norse, Jesus in Christianity, and Osiris from Egypt. This card is often interpreted as representative of martyrdom, as several saints chose to be hung or crucified upside down rather than replicate the manner in which Jesus died. End quote. So that's kind of the part I wanted to get across is like this isn't just one or two religions. It's come across a lot. The symbolism happens a lot of being hung, suspended from a tree to gain secret knowledge of the earth. Odin hung upside down, sacrificed to himself to learn the secrets, to learn the runes, to be shown the runes and understand what they meant. And that's the other word that's more strongly associated with hangman is sacrifice, or surrender. Surrendering to letting the world flow around you while you stop and listen and take stock. And actually, that was the other thing I wanted from her book, was the surrender. So, quote, one of my friends recently shared this with me. Remember that surrender is an act of will. It is a choice to unclench one's fists and to hangs oneself upside down and stay there, end quote. And that is the most important. That is one of the most important parts of the hangman. It's like stopping and choosing to stop and surrender and wait. Now, often we don't always do that. So if this comes up more as an advice card, it's like warning you that if you don't stop soon, uh, again, back to this, oops. Back to this Hush Tarot. If you don't stop, the world will stop you. She got all tangled up. So surrender. The hangman is more about potential energy rather than kinetic. It's again stopping, taking stock, taking the time and the stillness to prepare for the next step. Taking time to see the trees instead of just the forest. So the other thing that actually I came up with the last recording is we've got a few cards which are stopping and looking backwards. So our first one actually that comes up is the Hermit. The Hermit has been going forward, and now he stops to look as to where he's been. The Hermit is focused on the past, reading the past to understand the next step. Here in the Hangman, the next one, this is stopping in the present and looking not at just the past, not at just the future, but also where you are right now. The Hangman is more focused on the present. Where am I right now? What am I doing? What do I need to integrate? What do I need to learn? What do I need to prepare for my next step? The Hermit is about the past, the Hangman's about the present. And we'll figure out the future one as we go along. But the Hangman has to stop and understand. That's what he wants. So, now, inverted, a good quote for this is no pain, no gain. You have to put forth the effort to make strides. If this comes up reversed, it's like, okay, you are just, like in this Archeon deck, you've been sitting still for too long. You're turning to a mummified corpse. It's time to get your ass up and start moving. And that's what the Hangman usually means when it comes up right. It's like, okay, you've taken plenty of stock. Now get off your ass and start start doing stuff. That's the next step. That's the only way to keep moving, is to get up off your butt and go do shit. Mic drop. No, don't drop my mic. It's expensive. It's precious to me. So anyway, that is the Hanged Man. A study in opposites and how the opposites both inform, work against, and work with each other. It's kind of like oppositions in astrology. They're kind of clashing, but they're also helping balance each other out and move beautifully. So, yeah, that's the Hangman. So, I hope this was informative and interesting, and you got something new out of it, or got to kind of just refresh your brain a little on it, whatever it is you need. Yeah, so like, comment, and subscribe below. Find me on Facebook at Bags and Omens. Email me at bagsandomens@gmail.com, all one word. Throw money at me on Patreon. All the links are below for all this stuff that's not here on YouTube. Yeah, so that's it. So, hope this has been fun. Have a great rest of your whatever. I will see you all next month when we start on the Ace of Swords. Finally, moving on to a new suit. Hope the ones have been fun, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.